There's been a lot of talk recently about BRICS and the new BRICS dollar that will be created soon, and this is really exciting for many reasons, but there has also been pushback on the idea that a BRICS dollar could end US hegemony. So I wanted to take a look at some of the economics behind the BRICS nations and see what could happen if all 19 nations that have expressed interest in joining are accepted into the bloc. Currently, there are 5 nations that make up the BRICS, but many nations are looking to join, which could lead to a domino effect. Let's start by looking at the current members, and then we'll talk about the 19 nations that are looking to join and what impact that might have on world trade. We will then look at the role the US dollar is currently playing in global trade and how the BRICS dollar might be able to replace it. There are currently 5 nations that make up the BRICS, which include Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These 5 nations make up around 31% of global GDP, with China leading with around 17.6%. Each nation has its own unique assets, but arguably China and Russia are the most important because of China's manufacturing capabilities and Russia's oil and gas reserves. India and Brazil are important for their large and growing populations, and currently the 5 BRICS nations account for around 41% of the global population. This makes BRICS a massive bloc based on total population and global GDP, without adding the other 19 nations that have expressed interest in joining. So let's talk about the other 19 nations and what that means for the group moving forward. According to reports, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Argentina have formally applied for membership, and other countries that have expressed interest in joining include the United Arab Emirates, Algeria, Egypt, Bahrain, Mexico, Uruguay, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Turkey, Zimbabwe, Pakistan, Sudan, Syria, Algiers, Tajikistan, and Indonesia. These 19 nations are spread across the world and have started the application process or expressed some interest in joining. Many of these nations are smaller and with limited resources and manufacturing capabilities, but Indonesia and Nigeria have a large population, and Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE have large oil reserves. The BRICS bloc is already larger than the G7 in terms of GDP, and adding these nations would only increase the bloc's influence. So why do nations want to join BRICS? There are a few reasons nations are looking to join, which include avoiding sanctions, increasing trade, and avoiding SWIFT, the World Bank, and the IMF. These are just a few reasons some nations are looking to join. I personally think that nations are hedging their bets and making calculated decisions about the future. If a new bloc is forming, it is always better to join early and help shape policies and processes. To put this all into perspective, according to the Silk Road briefing, an expanded BRICS, including the nations above, would possess around 45% of known global oil reserves and over 60% of all known global gas reserves. Its combined GDP would amount to around 29.35 trillion US dollars, making it considerably larger than the United States economy at around 23 trillion US dollars and double that of the European Union, which is around 14.5 trillion US dollars in terms of GDP. The new members identified above would add just under 1 billion new consumers to the BRICS Plus family, for a total of 4.25 billion people, or just over 50% of the total global population in 2022. As you can imagine, controlling 60% of the global gas and 45% of the global oil reserves alone is a big deal. But also having a GDP around 30% greater than the US means the BRICS nations will be the largest and most powerful bloc in the world. So what would this mean for the US dollar? Well, currently the US dollar acts like a middleman for the global banking system. Because many commodity contracts are future contracts, countries choose to use the US dollar for international trade. There are a few advantages for this, but there are also a few disadvantages. The biggest advantage is stability. Because the US dollar is stable, many nations price their goods and services in US dollars. This can protect both parties from currency collapse or currency manipulation. By having a stable trading currency, nations can predict future prices and income based on imports and exports. The stability allows the world to trade. If the US dollar wasn't used this way, nations would have to directly trade, which is more risky for both parties. For a very, very simple example, if a nation like China writes a futures contract for 20 billion tons of soybean at a price of 3,311 Brazilian reals per ton with a delivery date 6 months into the future, they are taking a risk that the Brazilian reals and the renminbi remain stable over the next 6 months. If either currency fluctuates too much, one party will lose value on the delivery date. By having a stable currency like the US dollar, it removes that risk and allows for international trade to happen more easily. The US dollar remains stable because everything is pegged to it, including the price of oil. It is currently in every nation's interest to keep the US dollar stable. So why do some nations want to change this system? The reason some nations like Russia and China want to upset this balance and change the system is because of the disadvantages that also come with the US dollar. The biggest ones being sanctions, asset seizure, and inflation. The US has created an environment that is uncertain. By weaponizing the US dollar through sanctions and asset seizures, many nations are worried that they could be next. If you look at the list of the nations interested in joining BRICS, you will see that many of them are not on good terms with the US, and they are looking to create a system that better protects their assets. The US has been exporting inflation for years now, and with the increasing sanctions and asset seizures, some nations are saying enough of the economic oppression. The US dollar is being destroyed by the US, not China or Russia or the BRICS. It only makes sense that nations will act in their own interest and protect their assets, so creating a new trading currency makes sense for many nations. If the BRICS dollar is created for the purpose of trading internationally, it could replace the need to use US dollars. The BRICS dollar could be the new middleman, which wouldn't allow for sanctions or asset seizures by one nation. If the BRICS dollar is governed by a group of nations that vote on policy, it would be hard for one nation to weaponize the BRICS dollar. This is very attractive for many reasons. If the founding members have more voting rights or power in policy development, it would make sense for nations to join quickly. But how will the BRICS dollar be stabilized, and will nations adopt it? By creating a new currency specifically for international trade, each nation will still maintain their own currency. China or Russia or any other BRICS nations will not replace their own currency. This new currency will be designed with trade in mind, which means each country will swap their own currency for BRICS dollars. This is currently what is happening with US dollars for international trade. The way this new currency will be stabilized is similar to how the US dollar is currently stabilized, which includes oil and military force. If BRICS member nations are required to use the new currency and provide assets to back the currency, including oil or gold, then the currency will stabilize. It will also be in every nation's interest to keep the new currency stable, much like today with the US dollar. Also, if no single nation can print more BRICS dollars, inflation will be better controlled, further stabilizing the new currency. This is just my own opinion and speculation, but I think this is the goal. No one nation has control over the global reserve currency, making transactions safer and more transparent. Also, this will most likely be created on a blockchain that would allow for the BRICS nations to program the currency, controlling the inflation rate and allowing for some monetary controls if the group votes on new policies. The group could also program in a small tax per transaction to fund the BRICS, allowing for the group to grow a treasury to fund projects around the world. Having a global reserve currency controlled by the world makes a lot of sense and will most likely happen in our lifetime. If these nations are able to create a proper framework and monetary system, I do believe that over the next few years, the US dollar could be replaced as the global reserve currency. We currently have the technology and ability to create this system, which would allow for a global trade currency while still allowing for each nation to maintain their own currency. The biggest hurdles moving forward are the US and adoption. The US will obviously try to stop this from happening because it would greatly impact the US economy, and other nations might not adopt this new currency until it has proven itself. In a future video, I will talk about some of the problems that will occur if the US loses the global reserve currency status, and I will link it here. Let me know what you think. Does it make sense to have a global currency that is controlled by all nations? Or do you think the current US dollar system is good and is here to stay? I would love to know your thoughts in the comment below, and don't forget to like the video.